Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. If the goal of a vacant home tax is to improve housing affordability, it doesn't work. But if the goal is to improve housing availability, it does. In the Institute research report titled Ripple Effects, the impact of an empty homes tax on Canada's housing market, its authors used Vancouver's 2017 empty homes tax as a case study for implementing this tax across Canada. Meet Gherardo Caracciolo, one of the two authors of the report. He says shedding light on a popular but little researched housing affordability plan is crucial to helping policymakers strike the right balance between encouraging the productive use of existing properties and ensuring a steady supply of new homes as housing demand grows. Gherardo is a former senior policy analyst at the Howe Institute and a member of the faculty at the Simon Fraser University. He joins us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How did you and your partner leverage Vancouver's 2017 response to the housing crisis in your analysis by comparing it to Burnaby?
Yeah, so that's a methodology that we didn't invent. It already exists, but to our surprise, nobody have ever thought about doing it, and so evaluating the effects of this tax properly. So basically, it's there is a paper pretty popular that does it for Paris. In Paris, empty homes tax are not a new thing. They have been implemented a long time ago. And by the way, at the moment, they sit at a much higher level than Vancouver or Toronto for that matter. Like the first year is around 17% and then it increases. But simply, the idea is that, you read a lot of articles, a lot of papers that just do rough comparison between absolute values, right? So say, the tax must have worked because in Vancouver in 2016 there were X empty homes and now they are much lower. The truth is that this is not really a sound analysis because there are many things, that play a role in determining whether a home sits empty or not. So you might just be thinking that that's the effect of the house, but instead it could be something completely different. So what is the idea behind the difference in difference methodology that we used? And why did we focus on the areas that you just mentioned? So the idea is simply taking two zones that are as similar as possible. So our idea was like, okay, between Vancouver and Burnaby, sure, there are differences if you look at the whole city. But then if you look at the boundary road, well, the houses that happen to be on one side of boundary road and hence in Vancouver, and the ones that happen to be on the other side, well, they won't differ much, right? It's just crossing a road. So most likely, whatever influences the dynamics of the houses on one side of the road is going to be also influences the houses that sit on the other side of the road. And then on one side of the road, you happen to have the tax and on the other not. So basically, you take 2 points in times before and after the tax, and you're saying, okay, what was happening before the tax? You compare the two sides of the road. And how did these differences change after the implementation of the tax? And the differences allow you to retrieve the true causal effect of the tax. And it's great because census data are pretty granular. So we had these dissemination areas that are like just small blocks. So we had a lot of data points for our analysis and everything worked out well. And indeed, we are pretty happy because after reading a lot of hand waving, and I mean, I love hand waving, I'm Italian, but not when it's about science and when it's about data. I'm happy that we could actually contribute in a meaningful way to this debate, especially because, again, these taxes are becoming increasingly popular.
Well, so then what does a 1.5 percentage point decline in the number of empty homes really translate to?
So, I mean, it's not, if you look at the absolute number, well, it's not a huge number because we're talking about 1,000 homes. But this is also linked to the magnitude, right? So this is an analysis that, of course, we could not really do because simply there are no data and building a counterfactual was impossible. But again, as I was saying, if you look at the other big cities, Paris sits at 17%, London the council tax gets to like an amount that is 4 times higher than the normal one if the house sits empty. Dublin, 3 times higher than the property tax if the house sits empty. And these taxes have a much bigger effect in magnitude. So if I were to deliver you a meaningful message coming from our paper is that, okay, we have proven that the tax works. You might still be unhappy with the total magnitude because indeed there are still homes that sit empty. Well, it might be the case that we want to raise the tax.
We're taught that when supply goes up, prices go down. Is opening up 20% of the vacant homes to the market considered a success if it doesn't affect the average rent or the number of new homes built?
That is, so the number of new homes built doesn't necessarily come as a surprise to me because I don't necessarily, it might be me, but I don't necessarily see the link as many people think there should be. So like, I wouldn't be worried about that. I have to say that when we found that the tax affected availability but not affordability, that was a bit of a riddle at the beginning because, you know, like exactly as you were saying, standard economic theory would suggest that supply increases, hence the price should be going down. I do not. Again, this is like just my analysis, but it's not part of the paper, so it's not backed by data. But I would suggest that in these superstar cities, like there are these bad equilibria for which, you know, like Vancouver is so popular that no matter what, you know that if you're going to put a house on the market for a certain price, this house is going to be rented pretty quickly. So like... basically any type of price in equilibrium is sustainable. So that's the effect that I'm thinking it's at play. And this could be like a drawback of the tax, some sort of pass-through effect. Like if I have a second home, say that I'm renting it now, but you know, you never know what's going to happen in the future. I might want to keep it empty. And so I know that if I'm going to keep it empty, I will have to pay a tax on it. So how do I react? I charge more rent to my current tenants in order to cover myself from the future expenses coming from the tax.
So there's kind of a vicious circle that comes as a result of this.
There could be, exactly. This could be one of the drawbacks of the tax.
And just raising the tax even higher ends up just putting a greater financial burden on those doing the renting.
Exactly. That could be, again, this is not a link that we prove in the paper, but of course it's something that it's plausibly out there since we do not find an effect of the tax on average rent.
I'm a homeowner in Toronto. I got the notification that I had to declare whether or not my residence was in fact a residence or whether it was unoccupied. I marked it was occupied because it was. What's to prevent me from lying about other properties I may or may not own? Is it possible that the vacant homeowners were lying about occupancy in the data you were dealing with?
It is possible, absolutely. So that's one of the biggest problems potentially of our analysis, that, we have to assume that citizens in Vancouver and Burnaby truthfully reported the status of their home. As a matter of fact, me and my wife in Vancouver, we forgot to fill in the survey, so our house was marked empty, while it is not. So you know, like absolutely, like false reporting is indeed an issue. A potential solution, and it's something that me and my co-author are looking into for a possible spin-off of the paper, is to look at utilities. So, you know, like I'm looking at water, electricity bills, and, well, if everything sits at zero, then the house must be empty.
I wonder how we accomplish that, though. You bring up a very important point. One of the ways that police services have managed to find grow-ops in residential homes is by a remarkable spike in the use of hydroelectricity, that kind of thing. I wonder where we would get the data, though, on a basis that didn't require a judge to sign off on a warrant.
No, exactly. That's the problem. I looked a bit into that. Very tricky to get this type of data.
So, though, with that in mind, tell me though about some of the lessons that you learned through the course of this, not just from your research, but as you pointed out from yourself. Toronto had a terrible bureaucratic nightmare with people forgetting to fill out the forms, as you and your wife did in Vancouver. How do we overcome these issues?
We did not. Obviously, again, because we didn't have data, we did not highlight in our analysis, but, like implementing these taxes can be costly. So as you were saying, like if it's just a tick and you want to avoid the tax and you declare your second home that sits empty, not empty, well, if me, City of Toronto, I need to check on all the reports, well then how many people do I end up sending checks? Do I end up sending to check whether people are truthfully reporting or not, and how much does it cost? Are we sure that this doesn't cost more than what the revenues of the tax are in the end? So these are all things that indeed need to be considered. From, like a bureaucratic point of view, I would not say that is too complicated. Like you get your form, provided you remember to do that, you send it back, and it's not necessarily too difficult on the house owner side. But from the city perspective, indeed, I can see that, to really make sure that everyone complies with the tax, that can be complicated and almost unfeasible because, again, the land that they need to cover is a lot and the cost of doing checks is probably not even worth it.
We spent a lot of time talking about housing availability. What about the housing affordability component? How did you establish that an empty home tax doesn't improve housing affordability?
We look at the average rent. So you look at the average rent and we see what average rent does. So the idea is that, we would have expected to see the average rent of Vancouver falling with respect to the average rent in Burnaby for how the definitive works. But that actually didn't happen. So again, also, I should clarify, as you were saying before, that there might be this vicious cycle at play for which homeowners pass the effect of potential future taxes on the current tenants, but we did not see the average rent in Vancouver increasing with respect to Burnaby, right? So we saw no effect of the tax. And the thing there, though, it's that, I think this signals that really there are more measures that are needed. Because, again, availability, sure, big issue, but there's a lot being done in terms of building new houses. I see personally a bit less on the affordability side, and these are the type of taxes that you would expect that were really affecting the affordability side. So I think what this really signals is that we need to focus on that and really improve what we are doing in terms of improving affordability.
I was kind of under the impression that part of the reason for an empty home tax wasn't just to put more rental units out onto the market, but to encourage those just sitting on the houses, waiting for the housing market to get better, to just unload them and sell them and deal with that. Again, increase the supply, decrease the cost. But it seems like we're throwing out economics 101 classes when we have this conversation. Is this an across-the-board issue, or is this more, as you sort of suggested earlier, specifically a problem in major cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa?
I think it's a superstar cities issue. Like where, again, sort of the laws of the 101 economics are not exactly at play because there are many factors that kick in. And also, this has also a bit to do on what I was telling you before, that if you look at the absolute number and if you look at the percentages, well, we still have houses that sit empty. People that can afford to have 2, 3, 4 houses in Vancouver, in Toronto, well, they probably can afford to pay 2%, 3% of the value of the house as an empty homes tax. I'm gonna also say that they probably wouldn't even notice the difference, So And that's also something that should be taken into account because, one, they can they can afford very easily to keep the house empty. So what they might have in mind is also, okay, I don't care. Either it's like really an offer that I can't refuse, so at a rent that is very, very high, or, well, it's not a big problem to me to leave it empty. And that's where I was linking it to the fact that if you look at the other superstar cities on average, I think the rate is higher, the rate of the tax. But again, this is not something that it's backed by data, and it's my personal opinion.
You pointed out that a multi-pronged approach is required. What's your advice to a policymaker tasked with addressing the housing crisis in their community?
So I think that, as far as Canada, a lot has been done in the past years. If you look at all the national housing strategy and all the programs, provincial programs in BC, like to assist rent, Ontario as well as a lot of them. So I think that's the right approach. You gotta look at both the demand side and the supply side, and you gotta look at both the short term and the long term. Because of course, the key is supply side reforms. Availability, the key is building more houses, and affordability, the key is building more affordable houses. But again, as I say in the introduction of the paper, this is a very long-term program because, you can be as quick as you want, but it's not that houses are built from one day to the other. So taxes that are supposed to have more of an immediate effect, such as the empty homes tax, are definitely necessary from my point of view in order, to try to immediately tackle the issues and to sort of improve the situation. Not, a panacea, it's not that you implement that and then you can forego all these other supply side programs that instead, in the long run, are going to be the solution to the problem.
Gherardo, thank you so much for your time and your insight today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for talking to me.
The report titled Ripple Effects, the Impact of an Empty Homes Tax on Canada's Housing Market by Gherardo Caracciolo and Enrico Miglino can be found at cdhowe.org. If you're watching us on YouTube or listening with your favorite podcatcher, click the subscribe button for more insight from the Institute. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to the C.D. Howe Institute podcast with Michael Hainsworth. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. The C.D. Howe Institute is an independent, not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. The Institute is widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a trusted source of essential policy intelligence, distinguished by nonpartisan, evidence-based research and subject to definitive expert review. Visit cdhowe.org and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you.